Gentlemen, my name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Welcome to edition 71 of the Food Safety Fridays webinar program. It's good to see you all in the sidebar there saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening from all over the world as usual. Nice to have you with us today, wherever you're from. Today's topic is how to prepare for an unannounced food safety audit. Oh, is it frightening to you? Have you already had one, or are you brave enough to take one on? Anyway, Len Steed from AIB International is going to be discussing the subject today, giving us some tips on what we need to do to be 24/7, 365 days a week prepared for any type of audit. Just to say, obviously, some of you know about the sidebar. In the sidebar, you can type in your questions and comments throughout. We'll be running some polls at various points during the webinar, and we'd like you to vote on that and put your comments in. And also, we put in some offers in the sidebar at the moment. You can see there probably next week's webinar advertised, which I'll tell you about in a little while. Today's webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will receive a copy of the slide deck, the video recording, and the certificate of attendance. So if you do miss a little bit, if you have to get called away on an emergency or whatever, then don't worry, we will follow up afterwards. So it's okay. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker, Len Steed. Can you switch your webcam on, Len, if you're there?
Yes, I am, Simon. Good morning.
How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Good, good. And where are you dialing in from today, Len?
I'm in Manhattan, Kansas.
Right. And is that where you're from? Is that where you actually live?
No, I actually live in Pennsylvania.
Right.
In the Northeast of the U.S.
And you're taking a little break from a bit of a marathon training session to be with us today.
Yes, I am. I'm out here on a 3-week training mission.
Yeah.
And first week is down.
Very good. One down, 2 to go, and a nice little break to have a chat with me and the audience here. So, okay, if you want to get your slides ready and get them on the screen share, I'll tell the audience about next week's webinar, Len. Okay. In the sidebar, you should be able to see a picture of, it's actually George Howler, who's the CEO of Safe Food 360, and the topic's validation of cleaning programs. It's a requirement of GFSI standards, and next week George is going to be telling us a little bit how we can meet that requirement. So, okay, so sign up for that now. If not, just respond to some of our emails later. I'll be joining in with the polls and back with the Q&A later, but for now, I'll hand you over to Len. Right, Len, over to you.
Very good. Good day, everyone. Today's topic is going to discuss how an organization can analyze its present position and transition to a food safety level that would allow them to have unannounced audits. I think most of us know that if you are prepared 24/7, your regulatory and third-party audits will be a lot more successful. This presentation will look into some of the underlying factors that would enable you to raise to this level of preparedness and what conditions might undermine your ability to transition to unannounced audits. So let's look at some of the objectives and discussion points. We are all familiar with unannounced audits and announced audits. There are some tangible differences. We are going to look at the aspect with regards to comparing regulatory versus third-party audits. And then we're also going to look at any of the factors or conditions that might be affecting your food safety culture at your plant. For example, we're going to look at scoring. Most of the audits, third-party, have a scoring system to it. If we have a lot of financial incentives and bonuses tied to the score, there's a likelihood that there may be additional preparation for the audit. So we're going to have a poll question about this. We're going to discuss it. And we're also going to look at the level of preparation. Are there companies that tend to spend a great deal of time preparing as compared to the ones that have a very minimal level. And again, that impact on your food safety culture. We're also going to look at food safety messaging to your company personnel when you have announced versus unannounced audits. And we're going to have an evaluation. In other words, how could you poll and look at an interview and talk to your employees about unannounced versus announced. And then for those that want to transition, we are going to have a discussion about that. There are some facts about unannounced audits. They are more and more common. I did a Google search the other day, and there's just about every major industry, biomedical, pharmaceutical, are going to unannounced audits. So this will be applied to the entire supply chain. But there's also some reasons unannounced audits are not good for some companies. They can be very disruptive. In other words, if you don't have key personnel there to actually field the questions and explain the processes and programs, it can disrupt your normal business operations. Also, if you're not prepared, if you were to have an unannounced audit and you didn't have your systems in place, it could reveal some significant GMP issues, whether they be third-party or regulatory audits. It is obvious if bad situations are observed, or to use the regulatory terms, unsanitary or violative conditions, that would adversely impact your organization. So really what we're looking at here is preparing. And if you decide to go down the road of unannounced audits, you're likely going to have a procedure. You're going to have to test it. You're going to have to live that type of program. And as we all know, with any changes, input and planning and commitment from senior management is essential. So let's look at who controls the audit schedule. In other words, when you have announced or versus unannounced audits. Many times when I've been working through the years, you would like to come in and the customer will say, please don't come in, it's the busy season. Well, that would be probably the most logical time to come in because that's when you're making most of the product. If we compare this to regulatory, they can come in anytime. I've heard some excuses with regards to training. It's a busy week. But then again, we look at regulatory and they can come in anytime. Oftentimes, there are some legitimate issues like vacations, but the fact of the matter is that the regulators can come in anytime. And then we look at key personnel. In many companies, the QA manager or others are the lead person. And if they were out, the company would have a lot of difficulty managing, accessing records, and completing the audit effectively. There's also companies that say we're not ready and they need more time to prepare, which kind of tells you that they are spending a great deal of time preparing for the audit. And then I've had situations where they would prefer to audit on one shift when in fact the regulators can audit on any shift as long as you are processing. One thing I found that is very critical is that there be agreement within the organization with regards to the severity of plant conditions and issues with regards to GMPs. This is not the only way to do it, but this is just an example for the presentation. Most people would call unsanitary or violative conditions critical, and this would be understood within the organization that it is an unacceptable risk. In other words, it could be a Class 1 or Class 2 recall. And most of us know Class 1 recall means typically death or injury. Also, there could be major findings, which are a potential or actual regulatory issue that could allow for unsafe food. And then, of course, minor is a potential or actual non-compliance with a GMP requirement that would typically not affect food safety. So let's continue on with our comparison for hazard severity within your organization. If you look at the regulators, their enforcement clauses are 402A3 and 4. 402A3 is when the product is contaminated. There's no question. You can actually see it. But the enforcement clause that they tend to use most of the time is where the food has been held, prepared, or packed, whereby it may have become contaminated. And the regulators have a different view of contamination as compared to some of the third party. But when we look at severity, it will be defined by the third party audit criteria. Also on a third party audit, if you disagree with the auditor, you can discuss it with them. In fact, usually there's a system in place where you can actually object to the audit finding and challenge it with regards to the severity of the issue. But when you look at the regulatory aspect, they always fall back on that section 402A4, whereby the food has been held under conditions whereby it may have been contaminated. And this would be mold along the ceiling wall junction, which could be a long way away from a product zone area. So there are some significant differences with regards to how the regulators look at something and your ability on a third-party audit to actually go through and challenge some of the findings. So, how important are audit findings? If we look at a third party, you can request a review. You can also do that with a regulatory inspection, but it's likely you'll be bringing your lawyer with you because the regulators go through their own internal review process, and when they send you a letter or issue a Form 83, they're pretty much behind those findings. In a third party, you can strongly disagree. In fact, in some cases, you can actually have the auditor replaced. Or you could actually go on and decide that you would like to use another third-party audit group. But in all cases, third-party or regulatory, you would have to do corrective action. And again, corrective action would be reviewed by the third-party group, but it wouldn't have the severe impact of a regulatory person reviewing your corrective action, because if your corrective action was not done effective, it could be an adverse event for your company. So now we would like to have a polling question. And the background here is we would like to know the emphasis on the plant score and financial incentives, if these were in place. Is your third-party audit score tied to incentives?
Okay, yeah. Len, I've set the poll live in the sidebar. The question is your third-party audit score tied to incentives? And simply yes or no. And voting is coming in. And yes, settling around about 15 and no, 20, 80. 20 yes, 80 no. Yeah, actually it's gone up now. It's about 25% yes and 75% no. Is that what you expected to see, Len?
No, that's not what I expected to see, because it's my experience working with a lot of different companies, particularly larger companies, that the score for a third-party audit or GMP inspection is typically about 20 to 40% of the person's bonus. But again, I certainly don't disagree with the poll findings, but that's not exactly what I've experienced.
Okay, you can move on now, Len, then. Thank you.
Okay. So now I would like to look at the emphasis of plant scoring if financial incentives are tied to it. And I would like to look at the level of preparation. In other words, if you were to have a third-party audit, would you have extensive preparation? Would you classify it as significant or moderate? Or in most cases, you would do little or no preparation for that third-party audit?
Okay, again, I've loaded the poll in the sidebar, and the question is, what level of preparation do you apply? Extensive, significant, moderate, or minimal to none? And hopefully you can see that extensive is around 27%, significant 45%, and moderate 25%, and then just a few minimal to none. So there is obviously quite a lot of work to do in order to prepare for an audit.
Okay, so that is more in tune with what I expected, because it's just human nature to prepare for these audits. So what I'd like to do now is talk about if any of this preparation can affect the plant culture. These are things or typical activities that I've seen that go on prior to audits. In fact, I've actually worked as a consultant helping companies prepare for audits. Typically what you see is pre-audit of the key records, and if there's issues found, there are corrections made. There is also a survey of the prior GMP issues with the building and equipment to repair or fix deficiencies that would severely impact the scoring. And also you see a preparation or coaching of personnel for interviews. In fact, in extreme cases, I've even seen people asking where you're going to go next so that they can have people, quote, scout ahead to see if they see any issues that they would correct prior to you getting into the room. And then there's also the fact that many people try to control the audit. In other words, the auditor really relies on the cooperation of the company to access records and to go to certain areas. And what I've found or seen is that some companies that are being audited would actually try to control that situation. So what I'd like to do is look at evaluating your present position. In other words, with the information we've discussed, is there any impact on how your employees would view the unannounced versus the announced inspection? And it's my experience that many companies conduct interviews. Obviously, there's good communication, but many companies have used anonymous polling, and that's where they can ask the plant employees anonymously what their opinion is of the food safety culture, the GMP compliance. And what we're specifically looking at here is doing a lot of preparation actually beneficial for the organization, because what I've seen is it kind of presents two sets of standards. In other words, if you are in the category and prepare significantly or extensively, you're likely to be operating at one level of GMP compliance prior to the audit and during the audit, and then your GMP compliance will actually degrade. And the other thing to look at is, does the scoring in your third party actually predict your success for regulatory compliance? So really, is it beneficial to do this preparation to try to control the audit? And then with this information, you can actually go back and see, is there any need to change? Would unannounced audits actually allow you to have a more consistent food safety system? So what I'd like to do is have another polling question with messaging to your plant personnel. And the question is, does this affect the consistency of your employees' view on your GMP compliance at your plant? Is it positive or negative?
Okay, again, I've set the poll live in the sidebar. The question, does this affect the consistency of employees' views on food safety, positive or negative? And we can see around 85% positive and 13% negative. So the vast majority positive.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that completely. And certainly the polling speaks for itself. But the feedback that I have gotten from some of the mid-level to upper-level managers is that some of the employees feel that the company is operating on two levels. In other words, for the preparation in the audit, you do things that you ordinarily wouldn't do. You have a higher level of awareness for food safety. And then in some cases, you would slide back to business as usual. So again, the polling speaks for itself, but the issues I've seen is that operating on two levels is a concern for some employees, not only at the lower levels, but also at the upper levels. So what I'd like to do is have a little open and honest discussion about some of these discussion points we go over and ask the question, what does audit preparation deliver? What I've found is that it tends to obviously allow you to get a better score, but it does present some issues with regards to consistency. If you poll your employees and they are satisfied with the level of preparation and they don't think there's an impact, well, that's all well and good. But if you went to unannounced audits, you would be ready 24/7. And that, I believe, is the goal of many people, and certainly that is the way that industry is going. So for those that are seeking to change, what I would recommend is that they would at least go to unannounced audits for your internal audit program. And you need to be looking at how we're going to do this. And the concept we're trying to do is to be in a perpetual state of readiness. And if we do this, it's obviously going to cause or require more resources and planning, and also to have a procedure in place. If we do go to unannounced audits, I can almost guarantee that this will mitigate many of the adverse impacts that some companies experience when they go through this cycle of preparation and only do announced audits. So if we're trying to affect meaningful change, you would have to obviously have impact from your senior management. They would have to provide the resources necessary for all this cross-training so that when people were out, you would have backups that would be able to go through the quality, go through the processing, the maintenance and engineering, to field the questions with regards to the third-party audit criteria. But also, you would have to be in a state of preparedness on a third party. So the unannounced audits would be good. But you need to go through and do a critical review of your food safety system, taking you back to the findings, in other words, the severity of findings. You would have to establish that critical, no debate issue, that everyone would agree that this is a significant audit finding and would have to be corrected. You would also have to look at your corrective action system. What I've found in many facilities is that you have repeat corrective actions. So you'd have to have an ironclad root cause investigation to correct these and not allow them to happen again. Most companies, if they go to unannounced audits, they actually set up and do their audit preparation typically quarterly. In other words, we're using that same model for preparing, but it's ingrained into the system. It is done on a regular basis, typically quarterly. And all internal and external audits will be announced. There's certainly a transition We've had several large companies come to us, and they actually started with their GMP audits unannounced, and then they transitioned to having their third-party audits unannounced. So for those of you that are considering going to unannounced audits, we have another polling question. And these are the options here. What are the plant situations that could prevent adopting an unannounced audit?
Okay, yeah, I've loaded that in the sidebar. The question, what plant situation could prevent from adopting unannounced audits? Resources not available, company reluctant to change, plant score is viewed as most important, and finally, management commitment for unannounced audits is not supported. I suppose, Len, could multiple of those actually,
apply? Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, you're forced to pick one only, and how it's settled down is management commitment is the highest with 33%, resources not available 29%, which is tied to management commitment, I guess.
Yes.
Company reluctant to change 22%, and plant score is viewed as most important 18%. So how does that look, Len?
Yeah, that's almost what I expected. If you were to combine the resources not available and the management commitment for unannounced audits is not supported, those are really connected, because if you were to commit to unannounced audits, you would be having the unannounced audit procedure in place. You would adopt a system where you would prepare on a regular basis, typically quarterly, to have audits. You would do your cross-training so that essentially you would be prepared for an audit at any time. So that really is kind of what I expected.
Okay. All right, then. You're free to move on.
So what I'd like to do is summarize for those of you that are thinking about moving on to unannounced audits to improve or impact your food safety culture. Obviously, again, senior management is the key, so they would likely have to spearhead that. Many companies now are requiring unannounced audits along the food chain. That would your supplier, even the supplier to the supplier, the receiving entity, the customer, and even the customer's customer. Unannounced audits are very applicable to co-packers and suppliers, and it will definitely change the culture of a company. The reason I think unannounced audits are very good, because it tends to align your preparedness with regulatory expectations. This is particularly true if the severity criteria is understood and agreed upon within the organization. So if you were to go down this road, you would require training. You would have to have a documented procedure for unannounced audits, and you would have to have a system for testing this. In fact, many companies now are doing FSMA-related unannounced audits because, as we all know, companies need to be prepared at all times. So if you set up, you'd have to do a review of your risk-based food safety systems. You would replace that announced audit preparation cycle with the unannounced. You would critically review your corrective action and make sure that there are no violative or unsanitary conditions or repeats for your GMP compliance. An effective unannounced audit program will mitigate adverse impacts, and that is primarily tied to companies that get in regulatory issues. They have problems that they have contamination in the marketplace. So if anyone has had a Form 483 or warning letter from the FDA or from the state, they understand how an adverse impact can economically hurt the organization. So in the end, you would replace that preparation cycle and just do it on a regular basis. So with that, I'd like to ask if there's any questions or comments.
Right. Yes. Thanks very much, Len. If you could stop sharing your PowerPoint now, and then we'll go to the Q&A. There are some questions that have been coming through, so we can move to them. And switch your webcam on as well. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. A nice little primer there, Len. And just to get the discussion going, Simone says, isn't a financial incentive a bit counterproductive according to intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, that's kind of the point that I was trying to make with some of the polling that I did. Again, I'm not saying that all companies have financial incentives tied to the scoring on announced audits, but I do have to honestly say there are quite a few. And when financial incentives are tied, it's human nature that people are going to prepare, and in many cases prepare extensively, which really isn't a good idea for the organization, because it essentially says that we can operate on two different levels. And what I've found is that, you know, people within the organization, not only at the lower levels, but at the mid and upper levels, understand this, and it's not healthy.
Yeah. Okay. Lonnie is saying with SQF we get 2 announced and 1 unannounced. These are considered third-party audits, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Third-party audit. Yeah. Let's have a look. Simone, again, the question is what, I think this is related to the poll. What do you do if you don't get the resources? So if you're not provided with adequate resources to achieve the required level of food safety?
Well, if you follow the presentation, what I would suggest is that you would do some polling or interviews of your employees and actually find out from them if they believe that the organization has a good food safety culture. Just for an example, many people use SurveyMonkey, there's Suggestion Ox. There are others where you can anonymously poll your employees. And like most people, I'm sure they'd be happy to share their opinions with you. And I actually know companies that have done this, and they get some very interesting feedback because they notice the level of preparation for third-party audits tends to be quite high, where things that ordinarily wouldn't be done or postponed are done because, you know, you're having the audit and you want to get a good score. And really, I would like people to look at, is your scoring in your third-party auditing actually indicative of how well you're prepared for a regulatory audit? And what I've seen with these different cycles where you prepare and then you go into this other level, it's not good for the organization.
Yeah. Okay. Bruce, would you consider a 90-day window for an audit as unannounced? So,
actually, I would tend to say no, because I've been down that road before, and I'll tell you some interesting tricks. Is that the people at the plant would actually call around hotels, and they would find out when the auditor is coming. So even with the quote unannounced audit, I've found many times that the company actually knew exactly when the audit was going to occur.
Oh, I don't know. There's all sorts of sneaky ways, I suppose,
yep.
Isn't there? Really. Stuart, wouldn't continuous training and assurances of good work references, potentially unannounced audits, be considered preparing? It's not making sense to me, that actually, that comment from Stuart. Does it make sense to you?
Well, I can actually address what we were trying to convey, is that everybody knows that people prepare for audits. So what the model I was proposing, actually it's not mine, it's been out there for people that go to unannounced audits. And really this model comes from the pasteurized milk ordinance, is that they're required to do quarterly reviews where they go through, they look at their records, they review their corrective action, they look at their management commitment and projects, and they would have that done on a scheduled basis. So essentially what they're doing is replacing that announced audit preparation with being prepared all the time.
Yeah. I know also, Len, that some companies, as part of their internal audit program, for example, take, let's say it was BRC, it could be any standard, but let's say it was BRC, they take all of the requirements of the standard and put them into a schedule and perhaps do some of the higher risk ones more frequently, but at least annually, and then so that you're always then preparing yourself incrementally for that audit.
That's exactly right. And with the new regulatory requirements coming down the road with the Food Safety Modernization Act, which all countries are going to adopt something similar, is that it's really asking you to know the most critical food safety issues at your facility, and those would typically be audited more frequently. Yeah. But in the least amount of application, a company should really consider going to unannounced audits internally, and who knows, that is could be the start. In other words, you're prepared internally.
Exactly, and I think Adrian's said that when you say to have internal unannounced audits, is this for the preparation of when we have the unannounced FSM, FSMA or SQF? Yeah, of course. I mean, there will always be some tidying up and clearing of work in progress and painting that floor that you're meant to paint. That's not really a food safety concern, but you know, just putting a little bit of spit and polish. But it should be minimal for any type of audit, shouldn't it?
It should, because it's not the right thing to do, and like I've said, people in the organization notice stuff like that, and then of course they notice when things tend to slide back to where they were prior to the preparation.
Okay. Camille, we just had an unannounced third-party audit. How can I assist in getting more buy-in from senior management in terms of resources and support once corrective actions are outlined? So,
well, you know, that's why I had that slide in the beginning, where you need to have an ironclad or no debate agreement on what are significant findings. And by significant findings, I mean ones that will be an obvious regulatory issue. And most of us know that if you get caught with, condensate on or near over product zones, contamination, and that's why I pulled out the may have clause in section 402A4, because that's the idea of contamination in a third-party audit is much different from what the regulatory people believe. Their idea of contamination is much broader, to the point where if they saw contamination in the same room, they many times would assume, because it may have become contaminated, they will put it down as a critical finding.
Okay. Do you think, do you think it's frequent enough that GFSI, FSSC and SQF, etc. now do unannounced, but only 1 out of 3 audits?
Well, you know, you always have the option of going to 3 unannounced.
That's it.
No, you see, what I'm getting at is this is a start, and everybody that is in the audit game, as I say, knows that there is preparation. Now, whether it's significant preparation or minimal, that's really the question. And if you go on an unannounced audit, usually the results are going to be much different if you didn't do that preparation cycle. So it's almost intuitive that you would be better off going to some type of unannounced audit and be the same type of manufacturing plant 365 days a year.
It is a difficult decision, though, because, for example, I am familiar, I think, a bit with the BRC grading. So let's say a double A is announced, but you get a double A, but a B star, so you get that little star because you've had an unannounced. But to your customers, you know, you've got a B, who don't perhaps understand audit protocol and you know what is demanded from an unannounced, you know, and how difficult it can be. They just see a B instead of a double A. You say, yeah, but it was unannounced. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I would rather be a B throughout the entire year and instead of being the double A and then going down to a C or lower. But again, I think in the polling questions to your in your company and reassessing financial incentives is that it can be a detriment to a company when they get into this preparation cycle, and scoring is the main objective. So really what we're asking people to do is maybe go back and take a look, talk to your employees at all levels and see if there's a need to rethink this.
Oh, we lost you for a little second there. For some reason, there's another instance of oh, it's me. Okay.
I didn't touch anything.
No. I think my connection must have just dropped for a little second. Let's have a look. Any more in the sidebar? And if you can see any there. Federico, does the concept of unannounced audits really align companies who seriously care about food safety?
Okay, I think I got that. If there was a decision in senior management that they wanted to be prepared every day, the unannounced audits would serve them well because they would have gone through providing the resources, the cross-training necessary so there would be coverage to be able to field an unannounced audit. Oftentimes in companies, there's key personnel. In other words, the QA manager or other individual responsible for audits essentially is running everything. And without them being there, the company wouldn't be able to produce the records and in some cases even explain how the GMP programs are executed and how the KPIs are interpreted. So really what I'm saying here is that you would have the ability to have anyone come in at just about any time and have the confidence that your level of GMPs would always meet customer and regulatory standards.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's about the safety of the consumer at the end of the day, and you shouldn't be switching on and off procedures that help us to keep them safe and healthy. Right, Brenda, my facility has been BRC unannounced for 3 years now, and it keeps you on your game. Excellent, Brenda.
I would agree with that 100%. Good for you.
Irina, hello. Could you please elaborate a bit on the ironclad root cause investigation? Ironclad root cause investigation.
Well, I know everyone has root cause investigation, but when you have repeat issues, again, you're not addressing the absolute root cause. So, in other words, when I've reviewed as an auditor, but also come in as a consultant, I would actually look at their GMP issues, not only operational practices, but building issues. And if I see a pattern or trend, I'm going to bring this up. And I find this in most companies. In fact, in our training this week, we went through analysis for a company, and they have the same problems over and over again. So ironclad means is that you're going to have to face these problems that are occurring over again, whether it be operational, building, equipment related, and correct them so that you don't have problems with the regulators.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Len. I don't know if you know, Len, are unannounced food safety audits only tied to private standards and regulatory authorities?
Well, really what we were trying to get across in the presentation is that there's lots of GMP standards out there. And when you have an issue found on a third-party audit, you can discuss them, debate them, you can disagree with them. And then we have the other side of the fence in the real world where if a regulator came in and they found something, typically there's not going to be a lot of discussion. In fact, I've seen companies that had a couple of significant regulatory issues, and if you were to compare those issues to the third-party accreditation, those would likely be changed or modified. So again, the point I was trying to make here is that there's a stark difference between some of the regulatory views on contamination versus what you would see in a third-party audit criteria.
Okay. Any more questions, ladies and gents, before Len has to leave us? We've got a few more minutes. We've had a commenter in the sidebar, and I've been feverishly deleting the comments because it's just spam. Apologies to the legitimate commenters in the sidebar, but unfortunately I can't do anything about it.
Okay.
In regards to the sanitation of the plan, what are some of the key for in regards to sanitation?
Yeah, my audio kind of went out on that a little bit, Simon.
Yeah, it's just Adnan is asking, in regards to sanitation of the plant, what are some of the key points auditors look for in regards to sanitation?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, if you have a risk-based food safety system, you've already gone through in your hazard analysis and decided what is your critical cleaning. In other words, you know how long you can run a process line before you typically would get into indicator organism issues and then potentially pathogenic bacteria. But cleaning would also apply to your allergen changeover cleaning. The auditor would first of all ask you, what is your critical cleaning? And if you couldn't respond and tell them what your critical cleaning was, it would tell them that you haven't really analyzed this. So that's typically where I start. In other words, do they know what is critical for food safety?
That makes sense. Michael, do you believe that Lean Six Sigma principles help to get plants audit ready anytime?
I'm going to answer that yes and no. And then I'm going to get into the fact that in Lean, which I support, in fact, I'm a member of the Lean group at American Society of Quality, but also what I find gets in there is the term value added. And just this week at the training I was performing, one of the students said that many of the upper level management people don't view sanitation as value added. And in some cases, sanitation isn't value added because regulatory compliance is not meant to be value added. It keeps you out of trouble from an adverse impact recall. losing millions of dollars, losing customer confidence, and perhaps market share. So lean is very good, but it shouldn't be in conflict with your known regulatory requirements.
Okay, great. Ella, I'm pretty new to food safety, so can you please let me know what is 402 brackets A3 and 4?
Yes, and I know much of this is U.S. centric. In other words, this is what the FDA does, and that's not what everyone else in the world does. But these are the two enforcement clauses that the FDA uses. And the distinction is 402A3 is where product is contaminated. It's putrid, decomposed as pathogenic bacteria. But they tend to use the 402A4 clause, whereby food has been held, packed, or prepared under conditions whereby it may have become contaminated. And they use that enforcement clause almost exclusively.
Okay, thank you. Declan is asking, is there a difference in results between announced compared to unannounced audit performance?
I can honestly tell you that there is, because, as I mentioned, we have several companies that have decided that they are going to unannounced third-party audits. Typically, companies start out with the GMP, and they have noticed a significant improvement with regards to day-to-day conditions. This company actually modified their incentives to be broader and in other areas, so that it took the importance of scoring off, and it didn't allow the plants or have the plants prepare. So the unannounced audits, in my estimation and my experience, has had a very positive effect on most companies.
Okay. Kim is asking, besides using a poll, are there any other options, ideas to take senior management to support unannounced auditing?
Well, what I would do is actually do the survey poll of your employees. And again, I would do all levels, and I would even include senior management. And then I would bring out the points and the fact, is your company extensively or significantly preparing? And then with that information, you can show that you do have a variation in your GMP compliance. And let's face facts, senior executives are smart people. If you have variation in your GMP compliance, you run the risk of having the, quote, adverse event, which means having a regulatory issue, which always is an adverse impact on a company.
Okay. Adnan, again, what does an auditor look for in a master sanitation schedule?
Boy, you're asking these good questions today. Well, again, I would go back to the critical cleaning. First of all, has a company, do they know what their critical cleaning is? Have they prioritized and used their resources so that they could accomplish their critical cleaning? Where if they know they don't clean something in a certain frequency, then they are going to run the risk of, first of all, usually having quality issues. But then again, if those bacteria can grow and you're making a ready-to-eat product, then you can likely have pathogens grow. So everything's relative. There's conflict, as you know, within a company where you want to run the equipment all the time. Hopefully, downtime and cleaning is not looked at as a non-value added, because it really isn't. It's keeping the company healthy. It's preventing any adverse effects in the marketplace. And that's where the agreement on the significance of findings and conditions, it really needs to be a no debate issue within the organization.
Yeah. AO is asking whether unannounced audits are internal or external. They can be both.
Absolutely. And that's why for those companies that are thinking of transitioning, you would adopt your internal audits unannounced. And that would be a start. In other words, I've even found on internal audits that certain departments will prepare, if you're a large company where you have internal auditing going on at several different sites because you're using different auditors, if they're notified, they will actually prepare for the audit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've deleted a comment by accident, but it was a good one. It said about getting management buy-in. Should or are GFSI standards including more about senior management commitment and the culture of the organisation to actually build in some requirements and auditable requirements along those lines?
Okay, could you repeat that one more time, Simon? It cut out on me again.
Yeah, it was a comment that I've deleted, so I can't read it, but just remembering back, it was about, should GFSI standards include more about more requirements, senior management commitment in and demonstrating a food safety culture?
Yeah, I think that they should drill down a little bit. Many times I know during audits that I've done, I've been an auditor for 38 years, is that they always tend to put things on QA. Certainly you may meet with the site executive and talk to them, but many times if I wanted to be tough on the audit, I would actually interview and look at the knowledge level of the site executive. In other words, do they know what a true food safety issue is? And there are some times when in conjunction with finding bad issues in the plant, I would actually link the two. So that senior executive needs to understand this stuff.
Definitely. Okay, I think on that note, Len, I think we'll leave it. We're approaching the hour mark now. You've done a great job. We've answered lots of questions and give a lot of food for thought about unannounced audits. So thanks for your time today, Len.
Absolutely, Simon. Thank you.
Much appreciated from myself, everybody watching this now and who will see the recording, and everybody at the IFSQN. So hopefully we'll see you again on the 2018 programme.
You bet.